When it comes to conspiracy theories, I'll usually be the first one to tell you that the vast majority of them are little more than flights of fancy, as people try to apply logic and rational reasoning to the chaos of our real world. But there are real conspiracies out there. They're often nowhere near as complex or convoluted as the reptilian Illuminati you'll hear about on platforms like this, but they are nonetheless real. And few in our modern day have captured the imaginations of more airplane nerds than Lockheed Martin's legendary SR-72 program. Now, in past videos, we've already gone over how the SR-72 was meant to be the Mach 6 successor to Lockheed's legendary SR-71 Blackbird, and how this program was publicly disclosed between the years of 2013 and 2018. We've gone over verified sources about the turbine-based combined cycle hypersonic propulsion system devised to power this aircraft in a partnership between Lockheed Martin and Aerojet Rocketdyne, and even evidence that a single-engine flight research vehicle or technology demonstrator was already delivered to the Air Force for testing. Now, I want to discuss the growing evidence to suggest that the SR-72 has already moved into low-rate initial production, and seems to be on track to enter service before the close of this decade. Let's talk about the SR-72 and the future of high-speed aviation. I'm Alex Hollings, and this is Air Power. Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works division may have its sights set on getting back into the spy plane biz, but Lockheed Martin's fighter jet business is still booming. In fact, Greece just signed up to be the 20th nation to purchase these advanced 5th generation fighters, with an order placed for 20 aircraft to start deliveries in 2028 and the option to purchase 20 more thereafter. And this announcement comes on the tail end of Lockheed Martin delivering the 1,000th production F-35, making the F-35 program the most successful stealth aircraft production endeavor in history. And in fact, the F-35 itself is now one of the most widely operated tactical aircraft in the world. And I was able to stay on top of these developments thanks to Ground News, which is a news aggregator that collects news stories published by outlets all over the world and compiles them into a single, easy-to-read feed. But Ground News isn't just about staying informed, it's also about poking a hole through the bias that's inherent in so much of today's media, by not only making it easy to compare headlines between news outlets, but by also providing you with vital information about an outlet's political affiliation, its ownership, and even its factuality rating. Right here in Ground News, I can see that 19 news outlets have already covered this story, including 4 left-leaning ones, 2 right-leaning ones, and at least 7 centrist outlets. And in this case, the headlining is pretty uniform across all political affiliations. But if you check out the bias comparison section of Ground News, you can see that in the body of these articles, some left-leaning outlets have placed a much larger emphasis on the F-35 as a means to secure Greek sovereignty, whereas some other outlets placed a larger emphasis on the technology found inside the aircraft. With US elections coming up, I've been checking out Ground News' 2024 election page, where you can not only stay on top of all the news related to the presidential election, but you can even sort articles by candidate, by hot button issue, or my personal favorite, you can check out the blind spots, which are stories that are getting a great deal of coverage in one political sphere and not in the other. It helps me to make sure that I'm not getting my news from an echo chamber of like-minded outlets. And if you want to get in on this, I can get you a great deal. Just go to ground.news/sandbox with 2 X's, or follow that link in the description below to get 40% off the same Vantage plan that I use every day. Again, that's ground.news/sandbox with 2 X's to get 40% off their Vantage plan to help you stay on top of things. Over the past few years, we've spoken quite a bit about Lockheed Martin's SR-72 program, as well as several other hypersonic aircraft programs in active development. So for the most part, I'll be skipping over some of the finer details and how these systems are intended to function in this video. But rest assured that I will include all the context you need to follow this story, even if you haven't watched any of those previous installments. But if you want to get a little proverbial dirt under your fingernails and dig into the nuts and bolts of how things like turbine-based combined cycle hypersonic propulsion systems work, or even more exotic air-breathing jet engines like GE's rotating detonation combustion dual-mode Ramjet, well, I recommend following the links in the description below to some of our other videos that dive a bit deeper into the technology. This video will cover the broad strokes of the SR-72 and its intended function, but it will also delve into the relationships between the US Air Force, Lockheed Martin, its Skunk Works division, and Lockheed's investors, to form a cohesive narrative based on the evidence that points to the fact that Lockheed Martin has a classified aircraft in production in their newest and most secretive Skunk Works facility. And the evidence available certainly points to the high likelihood that that classified aircraft could be none other than the legendary SR-72. But it's not all good news for the son of Blackbird, because that same evidence also points toward the distinct possibility that this program is in financial jeopardy, right alongside seemingly all of the Air Force's big-ticket acquisition items as of late, certainly including the LGM-35A Sentinel ICBM effort, which has seen ballooning costs in recent years, and, of course, the next-generation air dominance fighter that is currently on a bit of a strategic pause as the Air Force tries to find ways to pay for it. Now, according to recent reports out of Aviation Week, a classified Lockheed Martin program that involves a highly complex design and systems integration went another $45 million over budget in just the second quarter of 2024 alone. And based on Lockheed's quarterly filings with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, that places the firm's total losses associated with this single shadowy program up to some $335 million since just 2022. Now, those same filings went on to postulate that losses may continue to accrue as the company faces, quote, advanced procurement costs moving forward. Now, this all points toward what Aviation Week describes as pre-contract investments made by Lockheed, suggesting that they're continuing to self-fund development based on the idea that the Pentagon will not only see the value in the platform they produce, but will also be willing to pay enough for a production fleet that the company can recoup its losses. Now, that might sound like a pretty unusual approach to developing such a high-dollar aircraft, but historically speaking, it's not really out of the ordinary for Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works. In books written by both Skunk Works founder Kelly Johnson and his direct successor Ben Rich, you can find accounts of all sorts of Skunk Works programs that began as a bright idea. Lockheed's engineers knew the US military or intel apparatus could very likely use, which were then developed and pitched to decision makers at the Pentagon, like the D-21 supersonic ISR drone. More frequent, however, were developmental efforts spurred by hushed conversations between men like Kelly Johnson and senior defense officials who relayed the nation's most pressing needs in hopes the Skunk Works hive mind might have a potential solution. Famously, Johnson designed and delivered America's first ever jet-powered fighter in this manner, with formal design work on the XP-80 commencing a full 4 months before the firm was awarded a contract for the jet. But in this modern era of bureaucratic oversight and extended design cycles, it seems unlikely that Lockheed Martin would have gone all in on fielding the SR-72 without some pretty conclusive evidence from the Air Force that they'd eventually step in to foot the bill. And the firm's financial records seem to substantiate that likelihood. Lockheed Martin secretly began development on a hypersonic or Mach 5 plus successor to the SR-71 all the way back in 2006, but they didn't formally announce the program to the public until 2013, with a media push that included several interviews with Lockheed Martin's hypersonics program manager and the engineer who had led the effort for the previous 7 years, Brad Leland. I'll quote him here. Hypersonic aircraft, coupled with hypersonic missiles, could penetrate denied airspace and strike at nearly any location across a continent in less than an hour. Speed is the next aviation advancement to counter emerging threats in the next several decades. The technology would be a game changer in theater, similar to how stealth is changing battle spaces today. This new high-speed aircraft would make use of never-before-fielded types of engines that were, for all intents and purposes, 2 or maybe even 3 types of jets in one. As Leland described it, this new propulsion system started with a conventional turbofan engine as its basis. He said that would either be a Pratt & Whitney F-100 or a General Electric F-110, which had both already seen service aboard fighters like the F-15 and F-16. The turbofan would allow this aircraft to take off from a dead stop and accelerate up into supersonic speeds like any normal fighter. But once the jet began to approach Mach 3, the second half of that engine would roar to life. Now, that second half was to be a dual-mode ramjet, sometimes called a dual-mode scramjet or supersonic combustion ramjet, which utilizes no turbine fan to suck in and compress air like a turbojet or turbofan engine would, but instead relies on the immense pressure of inflowing air at supersonic speeds and variable inlet design to create very intentionally placed shock waves to produce the necessary compression. As a result, these types of engines would propel an aircraft well past the SR-71's record-setting top speed of Mach 3.2, past the notional hypersonic barrier at Mach 5, and potentially even past Top Gun's fictional Dark Star, which was notably built in partnership with Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works at Mach 10. Originally billed as a Mach 6 Plus aircraft, this new platform was slated from the start as an intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, or ISR asset, just as the SR-71 was before it, but it also highlighted bringing strike capabilities to bear. This meant the aircraft would be capable of carrying a variety of payloads, including munitions to engage ground targets. The program was progressing and even drawing a fair bit of media attention up until early 2018, when it suddenly went dark. Now, not long before that, in June of 2017, Lockheed Martin's executive vice president and general manager for the Skunk Works, Rob Weiss, told the media that testing was complete on a turbine-based combined-cycle hypersonic engine for this new aircraft, and that Lockheed was, quote, getting close to beginning work on what he described as an SR-72 Flight Research Vehicle, or FRV. This single-engine technology demonstrator was said to be, quote, about the size of an F-22 Raptor, and was meant to demonstrate the platform's ability to take off under conventional turbofan power, accelerate up to supersonic speeds, and then transition from turbofan power to much more exotic dual-mode scramjet power that would allow the aircraft to achieve maximum speeds in excess of Mach 6. By September of that same year, eyewitness accounts of this flight research vehicle flying over Palmdale, California began to surface. Journalists from Aviation Week took these reports to Lockheed Martin's Orlando Carvalho, the executive vice president of aeronautics at the time, who did not deny the reports. I'll quote him. Although I can't go into specifics, let us just say the Skunk Works team in Palmdale, California is doubling down on our commitment to speed. In February of 2018, another senior Lockheed Martin official, this time the Vice President of Strategy and Customer Requirements and Advanced Development Programs, Jack O'Banion, told the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics SciTech Forum that the SR-72 FRV was already flying, confirming that claim with the Wall Street Journal after the fact by saying the aircraft is also agile at hypersonic speeds with reliable engine starts. But just as the SR-72 hype train was leaving the station, Russian President Vladimir Putin delivered an address that has since come to be known as the onset of the modern hypersonic arms race, in which he announced a slew of new doomsday weapons were entering service, including 2 different Mach 5 Plus missile systems. Almost immediately after Putin's speech, Lockheed Martin stripped any mention of their highly touted SR-72 program from their website, and the parade of quotes from senior executives promptly came to a halt. The company didn't announce the cancellation of the effort or any reason for a hiatus. It simply went about its business as though the SR-72 never existed, at least publicly. In our previous coverage, we argued that this dramatic shift may have been the result of the Pentagon stepping in with classified lines of accounting and a renewed need for secrecy following Putin's announcement. And we now know that behind closed doors, something big was brewing. By the end of the following year, Lockheed Martin had broken ground on a massive new factory and begun hiring thousands of new workers with no clear sign as to what exactly they'd be building. By the second quarter of 2022, Lockheed Martin filings showed a $225 million pre-tax loss on a classified aeronautics program that had just completed a comprehensive design review. 3 months later, however, Lockheed Martin filings indicated that the customer for this effort, who was not identified, had signed a memorandum of agreement to modify the scope and price of their contract, highlighting that there is indeed a contract in place, seemingly a fixed price incentive fee contract, and that Lockheed Martin is unlikely to have to swallow these cost overruns entirely on their own. With these budget overages now reaching a combined $335 million, it sure stands to reason that the overall cost of this program is a whole lot more. But that's not the only evidence pointing toward a highly secretive new aircraft making its way towards service for the US Air Force as we speak. Construction on Lockheed Martin's Building 648, a massive new factory built at the Skunk Works headquarters in Palmdale, California, was completed in August of 2021, with Lockheed Martin touting this massive 215,000 square foot structure as an intelligent, flexible factory aimed at reducing the significant investments of both time and money required to stand up new high-end aircraft production lines. This is accomplished, they explained, through the use of advanced artificial intelligence, augmented reality, and large, broadly capable robots known as Combined Operation Bolting and Robotic Auto Drill Systems, or COBRAs. As the Skunk Works revealed at the time, they had already demonstrated the functionality of these Cobra robots in the production of the technology testbed that would lead to the X-59A Quiet Supersonic Transport Testbed, or QUEST. But based on other publicly available information, the Skunk Works is up to way more than building just a handful of technology demonstrators inside the sprawling expanse of Building 648. As one, for instance, between the SR-72 program going dark in March of 2018 and September of 2023, Lockheed Martin increased the size of their Advanced Development Programs Unit, a subsidiary of that aeronautics division, by a whopping 75%, hiring more than 2,300 new employees over the span of just 5 years, with literally hundreds of openings still advertised on their careers page. But not all of the evidence is quite so indirect. There are also statements from Skunk Works officials that highlight how low-rate production of something is clearly underway. The most clear of which came from current Skunk Works general manager John Clark from an interview he did in 2022. I'll quote him here. I think it's fair to say that there is low-rate production going on in the Skunk Works. We've got our hands in a myriad of activities, so I feel comfortable saying that because you won't be able to factor in specifically what it might be and then create security problems for me. But yes, there are low-rate production activities going on in Palmdale. Clark went on to say that while the Skunk Works may be renowned for its rapid prototyping capabilities, the secretive organization has always been a manufacturing center for advanced airframes like the SR-71 and F-117, once again emphasizing that his team at the Skunk Works wasn't dedicated solely to fielding exotic prototypes, but high-end operational aircraft as well. I'll quote him one more time. I've really tried to reinforce that mindset that we do more than just a one-off X-plane. It's given me a lot more freedom with the aeronautics executive leadership team to let me grow Skunk Works the way it historically would have been grown. And that word choice really stuck out to me, though I will acknowledge I may be reading too much into this. But by pointing toward how the Skunk Works historically would have been grown, Clark was drawing a contrast between how the Skunk Works is perceived today and how the same Skunk Works was known for paying its bills under the leadership of now near mythical aviation figures like aeronautical engineer Kelly Johnson and his successor, Ben Rich. You see, these days, perceptions of Lockheed Martin and its Skunk Works are really centered around high-performance stealth fighters, like the F-22 and subsequent F-35. But that was not always the case. The Skunk Works was indeed established by Kelly Johnson to design a fighter, America's first ever jet-powered fighter, the P-80 Shooting Star, which entered service 2 years later. And in 1954, the Skunk Works saw their next fighter enter service in the F-104 Starfighter. But after that, the Skunk Works did not produce another operational fighter until 2005 with the F-22 Raptor. As Ben Rich recounts in his book, which covers his time working under Kelly Johnson at the Skunk Works as well as his time running the Skunk Works himself, the division did try to get back into the fighter business multiple times over that greater than half-century stretch, but Kelly Johnson's larger-than-life personality just rubbed the Air Force Blue Suiters, as he called them, in charge of fighter acquisitions the wrong way. In fact, after one final bout of Johnson butting heads with Air Force officials throughout the lightweight fighter competition that would ultimately produce the F-16, Ben Rich, as Kelly's second-in-command, got a phone call from the administrative assistant from the Air Force's Tactical Air Command's General Jim Stewart, who told him in no uncertain terms that the Skunk Works ought to go fly a bomber, because they were out of the fighter business. Which in itself was pretty funny because just a few years earlier, Air Force Chief of Staff General Curtis LeMay had told Kelly Johnson to stick to spy planes because he didn't know beans about bombers. And I don't say any of this to take anything away from Kelly Johnson. In my opinion, he is the forefather of modern military aviation. But I took you on this stroll down memory lane to highlight the fact that for 51 of the Skunk Works' 81 years to date, they didn't build fighters. They built spy planes. In an episode of the Defense and Aerospace Air Power podcast released late last year, Vago Meridian, the editor-in-chief of the Defense and Aerospace Report, brought up Northrop Grumman's RQ-180, a high-flying stealth reconnaissance aircraft so secretive that the US government has yet to even acknowledge its existence, despite it being photographed in flight a number of times in recent years. The high-flying RQ-180, the platform's actual name and designation is still unknown, is expected to replace America's venerable U-2 spy plane produced by Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works, as well as the RQ-4 Global Hawk in the coming years. But he didn't stop there. I'm going to go ahead and quote him now. There is another program, however, which is for a much more capable reconnaissance aircraft that is the product of the Skunk Works and is a Lockheed Martin aircraft. There are articles that have already been delivered, but that there have been challenges with that program. My understanding is that the program was rescoped because it is that ambitious a capability that it requires a little bit of rescoping in order to be able to move on to the next block of aircraft. Now, thus far, there has been no further confirmation of Meridian's claims, but many see him as a credible source, and his proposed timeline does seem to coincide with the delivery of a single-engine SR-72 flight research vehicle, one we may have even gotten a glimpse of in 2021 in a video released by the Air Force's Profession of Arms Center of Excellence. His claims also align with Lockheed Martin having to swallow the unanticipated costs of rescoping an aircraft program of this scale between two blocks of aircraft, very likely between the single-engine flight research vehicle and the operational twin-engine platform the SR-72 was always meant to be. And once you've got all those problems worked out and the aircraft moves into low-rate initial production, well, you're going to need a big old classified facility to build it in, full of thousands of new employees. Rumors of Lockheed Martin's SR-72 program may have once been dismissed as nothing more than flights of fancy within the aviation community, but in the years since this effort began, the technology required to make such an aircraft fly has gone from verging on science fiction to the sort of thing a plucky group of upstarts can pull off in an Atlanta industry park. And that's not hyperbole. As we speak, Atlanta-based startup HERMEUS is continuing to ground test their quarter-horse Mark I flying technology demonstrator, with the platform's first true flight test expected to come any day now. This uncrewed aircraft has hypersonic aspirations of its own and intends to achieve them using a very similar approach to propulsion. HERMEUS's Chimera turbine-based combined cycle engine, made up of a J-85 turbojet followed by a Ramjet, demonstrated its ability to transition from turbojet to Ramjet power inside a high-speed wind tunnel nearly 2 years ago already. And the company has already begun work on the much larger Chimera 2, which swaps out that small J-85 turbojet for a much larger, more powerful, and more advanced F-100 turbofan. Notably, one of the engines Lockheed Martin identified as the turbine basis for their own similar engine design. HERMEUS intends to field a new technology demonstrator each year as it progresses toward fielding its twin-engine Dark Horse hypersonic military aircraft, which probably won't manifest until well into the 2030s, which is a slightly longer timeline than the one offered by Lockheed Martin's execs prior to the SR-72 program going dark. In 2022, the Air Force Research Lab awarded a $334 million developmental contract to Leidos to field a very similar turbine-based combined cycle hypersonic aircraft dubbed Mayhem for, you guessed it, ISR and strike missions. Though they have since wound development down on this program, citing insufficient operational demand, but it's possible that that's because there are already two similar and promising platforms in development in the SR-72 and Quarter Horse, both drawing funds from Pentagon coffers. In 2021, Pratt & Whitney announced their own efforts to field a unique kind of high-speed air-breathing jet engine system that wouldn't rely on that turbofan to scramjet design to achieve speeds just below the hypersonic barrier. And then, in January of this year, GE Aerospace announced their own progress in fielding a rotating detonation-equipped dual-mode ramjet that they intend to marry to a turbofan to create what could be the smallest, lightest, and most powerful turbine-based combined cycle hypersonic power plant ever conceived. So at this point, it seems all but inevitable that the United States will field a reusable hypersonic aircraft in the not-too-distant future. Whether that aircraft is produced by Lockheed Martin, or by HERMEUS, or by someone else who partners with GE, for instance, but based on the evidence at hand, it sure looks like Lockheed's got a commanding lead. If low-rate initial production has already commenced on the SR-72, it could mean a similar timeline to service as the B-21 Raider, that also made its first test flight over Palmdale, with an anticipated service entry just prior to the close of this decade. And in one last bit of historical context that is not evidence, but rings as interesting to me, all the way back in 2013, when Lockheed Martin launched a media blitz revealing the SR-72 program to the world, an effort they had been secretly funding for 7 years already. The SR-72 program lead, Brad Leland, told the press that they could have a single-engine flight research vehicle in testing by 2018, and a twin-engine operational platform in service by 2030. Now, I want to be clear that that statement, like most of the evidence I've presented to you in this video, is largely circumstantial. And while it does seem pretty clear that there is a classified aircraft in production in Lockheed Martin's Building 648, that doesn't mean it's the SR-72. But as I look back over the ebb and flow of information being released about the SR-72 over the years, I can't help but be reminded of a conversation I had with a good friend many years ago. You see, I've never been a spy or worked for any intelligence agency, but over the years, the nature of my work has come with the benefit of having more than a handful of spooks on my list of contacts. And that close friend, who was a former intelligence officer who became a writer under the pen name The Odyssean, once told me that belief in coincidences was a privilege of the uninformed. And in his experience and opinion, when it comes to national security, there's no such thing. So is the near mythical SR-72 Son of Blackbird finally coming to fruition? I honestly can't say for certain, but I can say that if not, all of this mounting evidence sure looks like one heck of a coincidence. And with that ends yet another edition of Air Power from Sandboxx News. I'm Alex Hollings. Make sure to swing by sandboxnews.com today and every day for all the latest in news, entertainment, and motivation from all around the force. If you got anything out of today's video, make sure to click like and subscribe down below, and leave me a comment so I know what I should cover next. And of course, don't forget to tap on that bell icon so you never miss a drop from Sandboxx News.